So, Tower of Babel. We've been in Tower of Babel for the past 2 weeks on Wednesday nights in Genesis.
Yeah, more or less. Just kind of just seeing that that's really it's really a big theme in Scripture.
What is?
Not Babel itself, but just the idea of the arrogant versus the humble, right? Which is really what Babel is about. Where we have the people at the Tower of Babel who are building this tower, and it says to make a name for themselves and so they won't have to disperse across the world.
Which is what they were commanded to do.
Which, literally, just in the chapter before, as well as, of course, in the beginning, they were commanded to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And so they said, but let's build a name for ourselves. That's literally what it's. Let's build a name for ourselves by this tower, so that we can stay and not disperse. And it's very much taking sort of God's work in my own hands, making myself God. Right, same thing Adam and Eve, same thing the rest of the Bible. And then it leads us right into chapter 12, which is the foundation of Canaan, the city of the people of God, as opposed to the Tower of Babel. And in that chapter, we had this sort of direct parallel with Babel in chapter 12, verse 2, I think, where God uses the same language and says, I will bless you, I will make your name great, as opposed to them making their own name great. I will make your name great, I will bless you, you'll be a blessing to others. And so it's like this contrast of those who are like Babel, who are empire building for themselves, seeking to make their name great, which in some sense is the default setting of all of us, who are taking the work of God and putting it in their own hands, and those being the lost, those being the rebel, those being the goats, and the sheep being those who stand at the bottom of the mountain and say, woe is me, I'm a man of unclean lips, as Isaiah did, or beats his chest and says, have mercy on me, I'm a sinner. But who let God be the one who makes names great, like God be the one who decides about blessings, and then just simply obeys, as opposed to Babel, who disobeyed blatantly and said, we're going to stay. Abraham went out in sort of radical obedience when God told him to. And so there's this kind of motif or paradigm, whatever word you want to use, about Babel versus Canaan, in some sense the rest of the Bible. It's so much so that Babylon is a play on that word Babel. And Babylon is the city that represents pride and arrogance. And Nebuchadnezzar standing out on his porch saying, look at this kingdom I've built. And it's the same, it's Babylon in the Revelation that Jesus is coming to destroy. And so there's this whole kind of, this is what divides the lost person and the saved person, not really the particulars as much as it is a heart that is choosing to be God himself. You will be like God, Satan told Eve, versus one who is bowing to God and letting him be the one who molds the clay. Letting him be the one that calls the shots.
Babylon is actually called Babylon. That's the real name
Yeah.
that we have for it.
Yeah.
So it's not
in
like
history, outside the Bible and in the Bible.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, which is incredible. Like it's all
Babel and Babylon.
Yeah, it's all woven together, almost as if God was doing it.
Yeah. So what I was thinking about when you were teaching this, when you started teaching about Babel the other day, was what is the difference? Or how do we, let me say it this way. There's a lot of teaching about leaving a legacy, leaving your legacy, in and out of the church. And I feel like out of the church, what you see a lot of is that's the path to immortality. Write a book that becomes great.
That's a good way to say it.
Build a kingdom that lasts. Build, one of the things that I'm hearing a lot of on Instagram is generational wealth. Like your purpose as the male is to build generational wealth so that your kids will be taken care of and their kids and their kids. That's like your purpose in life.
Yeah.
And so there's that idea of like leave this financial legacy for your family, like that's your goal and that's how you gain immortality, so to speak. In the past it was, become a warrior that they sing about, and that'll grant you immortality.
Yeah. Isn't it interesting? Like, isn't it? And there's so much to say here, and we'll say what we can. Isn't it interesting that everyone longs for immortality? Right, that there's something in us that longs for immortality.
Well, it's interesting and it's not interesting. It's so within us that it's not interesting.
It's so natural.
It's like, of course you want that.
But like, all that stuff is almost laughable to me because, like, if there is no God and there is no heaven, then who cares what they're saying about me after I'm gone? I'm gone. It doesn't affect me at all.
Yeah.
Who cares about what they're saying? Who cares about my name? And beyond that, like, I don't know my great grandfather's first name on either side. Like, I know a little bit about my maternal
EK.
Yeah, I know a little bit about EK.
That's the only name I know.
Just because Pop was so young, he talks to us about him. But I know very little about him, even though he was a significant figure, owned a lot, was very wealthy. He's basically nothing to me in my life, and that's just a couple of generations. like no matter what, my name is gone almost immediately upon death. And so this idea of leaving a legacy in a secular mindset to me is just hard to. It's like grasping at straws that aren't there. It's like grasping at meaning when it's not really anything.
So then so
But let me ask you this.
Yeah.
So, because you're right. This is so talked about, and it's like it's one of those things taken for granted. Like, well, you want to leave a legacy. You want to leave a legacy. And there's a passage in Proverbs that talks about it's good for a man to leave an inheritance to his children and his children's children. But it's not clear it's talking about money. But is it good? And I'm not even saying biblical, really. Is it good in your experience for a child to be left a large inheritance? Right? I mean, what tends to happen to the child who is the trust fund baby or the
I don't know
large
any.
inheritance child? I know a couple, but like.
but I do know. Okay, I see what you're saying though, because I had friends.
Like, isn't it an assumption that is hard to establish the validity of to say that it's good to leave your child a large inheritance?
Yeah,
Why is that good?
I don't know of anybody that I grew up with that had plenty of money, like what we would think of as like an inheritance,
Yeah.
That turned out okay.
Yeah. Well,
In the long term, a few of them have come back around, but like there was
Yeah.
a solid decade of
Yeah.
wandering, and not knowing
sure.
like what to do.
and the ones that I know that, and you don't have to even say inheritance. You could just say the kids that grew up really wealthy.
It's not always the
Define
case.
really wealthy.
Yeah, that's hard.
So define really wealthy because we live in rural
Just-
Alabama.
yeah.
So what's really wealthy here?
It's hard. I mean, it's hard to draw that sort of line. I mean,
Here's what I would draw. Here's a line I would draw for really wealthy.
yeah,
Is they're not worried about how often they go out to eat,
yeah.
which is a silly thing, but like, you're
It's
not
like-
worried about that.
Yeah,
You believe that a new car is your birthright,
yeah.
and that
That's
if
a
the
good
car
one,
is
yeah.
old, if it's more than 5 years old, then the
Yeah.
car is too old. That's really wealthy to me.
Yeah, I went to private school, and you did too for a while.
Yeah.
And like the parking lot of that private school was
It's still ridiculous to
and
this
right,
day.
right now, I dropped one of my kids off this morning at the preschool up there, and driving past in my
Story.
in my 1986 4Runner, driving past cars that are worth my house. Like honestly, that a 16-year-old is driving.
Yeah.
And like just those that are significantly above the sort of median line in the community that you're in. It's not always the case. Right? I had a friend or two that were great, but the majority of the time, those kids are not all that likable for their personalities. Maybe they can offer you things that others can't, but and of course that's true. Like if we believe what Jesus said biblically that it's harder for a man to enter the kingdom of heaven who's wealthy, then why is it a goal for ours to make our kids wealthy? Right? If it's, I mean, how much more character is built by struggle than by ease? And it almost seems, not that it's wrong, but it almost seems unwise to say, here, kid, I'm going to leave you a lot of money, and that way you won't have to really work like everybody else is working. You won't have to struggle. You won't have to rely on God. In a way, I don't know. It seems like there's these large assumptions, especially in the Christian world, to say, well, you want to leave your children an inheritance, you want to leave your children a legacy, meaning financial things. When I don't know that that's such a good thing.
Well, you talk about our great grandfather was very wealthy and didn't leave.
Then there's anything.
As far as I know, he didn't leave anybody money.
Yeah.
And I think
There's some family bitterness there.
yeah. I think that there's it's interesting to me because I've wondered this. We went through as kids. We went through times where we had plenty and where were times we had nothing.
Yeah.
Right. So, I wonder if his whole reasoning for that was to not spoil
Maybe.
the child. I mean,
Maybe.
he went through the Great Depression.
Right.
So it's like
He knows. Yeah. Maybe
by the time he died, it was
maybe
90.
wisdom.
He died in 95, 96.
Yeah,
So-
maybe so. Maybe we can give him the benefit of the doubt. And, often we kind of assumed it was greed, but maybe it was wisdom. And like to give a real concrete example, our mother, who both of us probably consider as the greatest human we've ever met, right? Incredibly generous, incredibly sacrificial, incredibly hardworking. When she was in high school, I talked to my grandfather the other day, Pop James, and he said, your mom could have moved out of the house and lived on her own at 14. Like she was just groany. And when she was in high school and in college, she worked at least one, sometimes two jobs just to put herself through college.
Yeah.
Right.
To live
Worked.
on her own.
I mean, slept very little because she was always working just to pay off for college. You had to live on her own to do the things that grown-ups do. Really struggled and really had to work hard. I mean, hard. And if EK, her grandfather, would have left a lot of money, she probably wouldn't have to do all that.
Yeah.
And so how different is she today if she would have been left that sort of financial pillow that would have caused her not to have to work as hard as she did, you know? And then how different are we because of how different she is? And then how different are our kids because of how different she is? And so like this, at least in that scenario, and I think you can see how that's reasonable, that it would have been worse, at least in the ultimate philosophical sense, it would have been worse for him to leave an inheritance so she didn't have to work hard. And surely, like just as parents, I'm always looking for opportunities to make my kids work hard, to really help them understand how big of a deal it is to really work hard. And you know, if you're leaving your kids a large inheritance, at least in some sense, you're taking that away from them, the requirement to have to work hard. Because if you're not required to, you're not going to. We just don't do that.
Yeah.
So I don't know, the idea of generational wealth, like the people I know that would have been considered to have generational wealth, sort of like trust fund folks, just, it's not a big, never really learned what it was like to have to provide, because you don't have to really struggle, because you don't have to. There's just a lot of great virtues that are learned via not having anything.
I would think the only way to learn a virtue is through suffering.
Struggle, yeah,
You don't
yeah.
learn a virtue from
Yeah.
everything going well.
Like who wants, like, and you see it simply in kids that are spoiled, right? That there's no worse essence in the universe than a spoiled child, right? That kid's miserable. The kid who thinks who's entitled to all things, who's always been told yes, who's never been told no, that kid is the worst. And it's just that we hide it better as adults, but there's adults like that as well. And the quicker the more you get to know them, the quicker you realize that they're just no different than that same spoiled child, and it's not a pleasant thing. And it's those kids that were given everything.
I wonder how much that shaped the decisions that we've made in our lives financially, even like jobs.
Even that being poor.
Yeah, well, poor is relative.
No, I'm just
but
kidding, yeah.
but no, yeah, I mean, it's like not pursuing that.
Yeah. But both
As
of us, and just genetically, our parents are both very smart, worked for NASA, and Dad made a lot of money, could have made more. Mom same, worked for NASA and was very smart. We both have intellectual capacities to do things that make a lot of money. But here we are, doing ministry.
Like a couple of dummies.
Like a couple of just
Jabronis.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think in large part it's because our parents, our grandparents, our great-grandparents left us a legacy that was not primarily financial, right? Left us a legacy that was, this is why you're here, and it's not to make a lot of money. This is what it means to work hard, and it's not primarily because of what you get out of it, And so there's a legacy left to us by our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents that is far greater, even though it's led us into lives that are less financially well off, whatever you want to say.
So to move from that and thinking about the reason for legacy, obviously, is Tower of Babel was a legacy. They were trying to show how great man
Make our name
was.
great. Yeah.
My great grandchildren are gonna look at this tower and think, man, my great granddad
Who cares?
laid a brick.
but yeah, that's exactly right.
So you have these. I feel like I see it at least once a week. Some motivational talk about building generational wealth for your family, like really pushing that idea into the hearts of young men.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is what you should. This is your purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a purpose you can really buy into as a young male. It's like you're a provider.
And it's kind of it's a simple purpose. It's a simple.
And then on the other side, you have that on the secular side. On the Christian side, you have a lot of teachers saying that your job is to leave a legacy, and obviously they mean something different. So first of all, I guess there's a 2-part question. The first is, what's the difference between a Christian legacy, a legacy as a Christian, and a legacy as a secular person? And then 2, how do you make sure that the legacy you're pursuing as a Christian is not as simple and short-sighted as the legacy you pursue as someone who doesn't believe in God?
Yeah. I think the juxtaposition and dichotomy between Babel and Canaan is a good example here, where you have some that are explicitly building for their own name, and Abram, who ends up with a great nation, though he doesn't see much of it in his actual life, but he ends up, he's very wealthy and has a lot of success. But his is all with eyes upward, aimed upward for God. If God would have said, Abram, leave your home, you're going to be poor the rest of your life. He still would have gone by faith. And so his legacy is, I think most Christian teachers, or at least the ones that pop up on my timeline, do a good job of this, explaining this, is his legacy is the God-focusedness, the God-towardness of life that is passed down from generation to generation in a way that the other one is not. It's me-focusedness. It's they'll remember me, right? So do I want to leave my children with reasons to remember how good I was, or do I want to leave my children with reasons to remember how good God is? And so like your life itself is building that legacy. Right, like the end of Genesis, the last chapter of Genesis, we have Joseph dying, and he is saying his last things to his children. He said that he's dying, and he sets up this thing for them to remember that they're about to have the Exodus. We don't notice this often, but Joseph is looking forward to the Exodus, and looking forward to going to Canaan. Joseph grew up in Egypt, right? He was an Egyptian through and through. Really, he was taken to Egypt around 18, 19. At the point in Genesis 50, he's 110, so he's been there forever. And he has an Egyptian wife. He has Egyptian children. Israelite Egyptian children. He's part of Egypt customs. And yet, at the very end of his life, still, as he's dying, he is saying, "Don't forget, children, we're going to Canaan. Don't forget, children, we are God's. Don't forget, this is what's occurring." And so he's leaving them with these realities about God. Not to mention all the things that he left because of his life. Right? He through his life taught them how to forgive despite being wronged greatly. He taught them how to not be bitter, but to be generous in response to those who have wronged you. And all these great things that are the most significant legacy he's leaving. But it is a very biblical thing. The idea of leaving a legacy, if you mean it right, is a very biblical idea, because there's this constant concern that generation passes to generation, the glory of God, the truth of God, what God has done for us, what God is doing for us, what God is going to do for us. Right? So in that sense, like the legacy that I want to pass on to my children and the legacy you want to pass on to your children is the same. It's God and what God has done, as opposed to the secular idea is I'm going to pass on to my children the reason they should remember me. You're going to pass on to your children the reason they should remember you. Instead, as Christians, we together are passing on the same legacy to our children, which is God is faithful, God is good. We are on our way to Canaan, right? We are on our way to the promised land. These are the things that's true, as opposed to the things the world is saying is true. But it's a very biblical thing to say, pass these on to your children. Write these on the tablet of your heart. Pass it from generation to generation to generation. And that's an important thing. The issue is what are you passing on? My glorification or God's?
Yeah. Okay. So that makes sense. So the Christian legacy is one that points back to God. That's basically it.
Yeah.
So you're working on the right legacy.
Yeah.
If you're working on passing that.
I think so. Like, and we see that with a lot of places in the Bible. One that I like that is clear is Peter in 2 Peter. He's about to die, and he knows that. He says, "I intend to always remind you of these qualities, though you know them and are established in the truth that you have. I think it's right, as long as I'm in this body, to stir you up by way of reminder, since I know that putting off my body will be soon, as our Lord Jesus has made clear to me. I will make every effort so that after my departure, you may be able at any time to recall these things." Right? So Peter's saying, as I'm dying again, what I want you to remember, the thing I'm trying to leave with you, are these truths about Christ. It's what Christ has done for you, the truth, the gospel. It's who God is, and how big God is, and how much God loves you, and all these, and what God demands of you, and all these great things. That this is what I want to leave, and it's not, I'm going to leave you enough money that you don't have to worry about this and this and this. It's I want to leave you God. That's literally it. I want to leave you God, and if you have Him, then everything else kind of takes care of itself. There's a passage in Judges too that I think is strong, where it says, "There arose another generation after that generation who did not know the Lord or the work that He had done for Israel." Mm-hmm. I think very often we think about the young people today and we get frustrated because maybe some aren't following the Lord, but largely it's not on them, because the generation before didn't pass it on. Whether that's us or our parents or whatever it is, but there's this responsibility for us to pass on God, not ourselves, but to pass on God to the next generation. And that's one of the crucial tasks of the Christian. So if that's what we mean by leave a legacy, then hallelujah,
Yeah, there was, we were reading this in the same Old Testament study. We were reading, I think it was the same study. But we were reading how when the Egyptians, maybe this was in the Egypt series that we were listening to, but when the Egyptians were in slavery, Moses didn't even
Israelites were enslaved?
Israelites.
Yeah.
What did I say?
Egyptians.
Israelites enslaved in Egypt. Moses asked he asked God, what should I call you? It kind of lets us know that he didn't even know what to call God. That in the 400 years of being enslaved, they had forgotten God's name.
That's good. Yeah, I like that.
So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
Speaking generationally,
Right. Yeah, I think that's great. And like how, like, my goodness, your whole foundation is laid by your parents. And so if the parents are laying down a foundation of God and God-focused life, then that's what you start with. And if you're going to leave that, you have to make great effort to do so. You can leave it, but the effort is large. And like with us, we have such a good example of it because we know our grandparents on both sides well. They're still alive. One of them is still alive, our paternal grandparents, and all of them are following the Lord and have been. And parents the same way. And so there's just been this legacy of Christianity, this legacy of loving Christ, this legacy of God that's been passed on to us that is infinitely more valuable than if our great-grandfather would have left us millions, which may not have even been valuable, may have been harmful, right? So this idea of legacy can be an awesome thing if what is meant is, I will leave you God to the best of my ability, the true things about God. And goodness, we need grandparents that are reminding their grandchildren when their parents forget, hey, who cares if you didn't make the football team? You know?
Yeah.
Who cares if you aren't that good looking? Who cares if you aren't that smart? I not that who cares, not to belittle their emotions, but to say that you are here for bigger things than that. That you aren't created here to make the football team or to start or to go to college play ball. You aren't here to play travel ball. You aren't here to be smart. You aren't here to make good grades. You aren't here to get into a good school. You are here for God. And if you have that, everything else is secondary or tertiary. That is your success. And that same idea of Joseph, that we are on the way to Canaan. That's where we're going. It does not end here. It is not, if you fail here, you fail forever. We are on our way to somewhere else. And we need grandparents reminding our grandchildren what is true.
What was the ultimate? I mean, what was the ultimate end of Babel? I mean, they all were given different languages, which made it impossible for them to work together. And what else do we see?
What a weird story, man. What a weird story.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to bring it down because Genesis 1 through 11, we talked about last time, is probably the most debated chapters in the Bible, certainly the most 11 chapters as a function or as a part of the whole debate in the Bible, how to understand those things. And what's weird about Tower of Babel is in chapter 10, we're told about a bunch of nations who have their own languages. Right? So this is the chapter before that. So,
which I did not know until I heard that Wednesday.
So, and there's like Greg pointed this out, it could be that chapter 11 kind of is it's not chronological, and there is, again, Genesis 1 to 11 very complicated to understand. So it could be that comes before that and all that. But just reading it seems like that the point of it was not maybe what it seems like at first glance, was to disperse the languages for the first time, because there's already languages mentioned by the tens, if not hundreds, already in the book, certainly the chapter before. And so you have the Tower of Babel, which is much more historical or not, much more theological than anything. And I think it's setting up that whole paradigm of this is what lost people look like. I mean, in some sense, is they are empire builders. Which is, I mean, goodness, if you go, like, I like go sitting out. I used to go sit at the mall when that was a thing. People don't really go to the mall. But just like sitting in an intersection and seeing cars drive by and realizing that most of them are just trying to build their own empire. Right? That's what most people are doing. Just trying to build their own name, trying to build their own empire, trying to build their own comfort. And
thinking about the Roman Empire.
Not that they're all in Babel, because I have those moments the same. Thinking about the Roman Empire, right? At least once a week. But we see that already in chapter 11, that this is Babel, that these people who are trying to build a tower to God, right? Which they knew God wasn't literally in the clouds already at that point, right? We know that. And it even says, like in sort of this humorous, condescending way, that God came down to see the tower. Like they were all excited about the tower that was almost to heaven, and that God couldn't even see it from heaven, which of course he could, but I think it's meant to be humor. And so it's the people that are trying to get to God instead of allowing God to come to them. And I think it's primarily just setting up a paradigm for the rest of Scripture, and it may be that it, like some scholars hold that it's that it is to be taken literal and historical, but it's not about the whole world's languages, but the languages in Mesopotamia, in the Mesopotamian area, which is often referred to as the world. But who knows? I don't have a real position on it, really.
They're talking about talking about leaving a worldly legacy, I was watching this show, or this YouTube channel, and the dude has bought a chateau in France, I think.
What is that? Is it like French
Castle.
house?
It's castle.
It's
I mean, it's a
castle.
giant house. Yeah, like really, really giant house. And he got it at auction.
Chateau.
And the way he got it is he showed up for the auction, and there were several hundred acres of farmland that were owned by this house as well. And those auctioned off first, $1 million, $2 million, tons of money, right? And people were buying those to develop because they were being opened up as farmland. And then the chateau went up for sale, and he bid the first bid on it, and nobody else bid on it. So he ended up buying this thing for like $600,000. And I don't even know. It's so big and nice, I don't even know what it would
Yeah.
be. You know what I mean?
Right.
Unfathomable.
Right.
But he was saying that what happened is they had the family, it was owned by a family. The family had a very, very wealthy great granddad that owned the chateau and the land and all the stuff. Very wealthy people. Here's an example. This place is so big that the gatehouse, the entry house, is bigger than your house. It's like taller, obviously, but it's bigger. I mean, there's more square footage in the gatehouse than your house. And so he gets it for $600,000, and what had happened is it had been left by this very rich great granddad to the family. He passed away, maybe his granddad, I don't know. And they fought over it. Couldn't decide who wanted to work on it, who wanted to own it, who wanted to take the responsibility for fixing it. Nobody, who's going to live in it, and they just fought until finally they were like, we're just going to sell it and put it up for sale. And so it is interesting that so much is preached to us: build your legacy, generational wealth, make sure your kids have it better than you, and yet it seems like oftentimes the kids end up fighting over the generational wealth that you built.
Yeah.
And you end up just losing it anyway. I mean, it's gone now.
Right. Yeah, I think
So-
that's very often the case. And again, there is biblical understanding for. Well, one scholar, a very deep scholar that you've heard of, said it like this: "Mo money, mo problems." That's just how it tends to happen.
Slim Thugger.
But it's true. I mean, it's just there's truth to that, and with more money becomes less need for character development, and thereby less joy.
Yeah.
It's I think I want it to be better for my kids, but that doesn't necessarily mean I want them to have more money than me. I want them to be closer to Jesus than me. I want them to love God more than I do. That's what I want. I want them to have a better life, which to me is defined by knowing God more. That was pretty good.
It's a good end.
Yeah.
We can cut there.